Our focus today is to analyze the intricate and far-reaching consequences of European colonization on both the Old World and the New World, shedding light on how these transformative events reshaped societies, cultures, and economies. To frame our discussion, it's essential to understand that European colonization was not a singular or monolithic process, but rather a series of dynamic and interconnected events that unfolded over centuries. This period was characterized by the encounter between European powers and the diverse societies of the New World, which had profound implications for both sides of the Atlantic. In the Old World, the era of exploration and colonization brought about a seismic shift in European economies and societies. The influx of precious metals, such as silver and gold, from the New World significantly boosted European economies. This influx of wealth led to increased trade, economic growth, and the rise of powerful nation-states. The economic prosperity funded an array of ventures, including the flourishing of the arts and continued exploration. European economies became more intertwined with global trade networks, marking the rise of a capitalist economy and the mercantile system. Simultaneously, the European encounter with new resources and cultures ignited a curiosity that would fuel the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. The introduction of new plants, animals, and technologies expanded European horizons and spurred intellectual advancements. The cross-pollination of ideas, driven by increased global interactions, contributed to a period of significant scientific and philosophical progress. This intellectual awakening laid the groundwork for modern scientific inquiry and the questioning of traditional beliefs, fundamentally shaping European thought and culture. Turning our attention to the New World, the impact of European colonization was equally transformative but often devastating for the indigenous populations. The arrival of Europeans marked the beginning of a period of dramatic change, as societies were remapped and cultures were disrupted. The introduction of new crops, such as potatoes and maize, revolutionized agricultural practices and diets across the globe. These crops became staples in various parts of Europe, Africa, and Asia, leading to improved food security and population growth in many regions. Additionally, European animals, such as horses, were introduced to the New World, profoundly altering indigenous ways of life. Horses became integral to hunting practices, transportation, and warfare, significantly changing the dynamics of indigenous societies. The integration of these new animals into existing cultures resulted in both opportunities and challenges, reshaping traditional practices and social structures. However, the arrival of Europeans also brought about severe negative consequences for indigenous populations. The displacement from ancestral lands was a direct result of European encroachment, leading to the fracturing of communities and the erosion of cultural identities. Indigenous peoples faced the loss of their traditional territories and were often forced into new social and economic arrangements dictated by colonizers. The impact of European diseases was equally catastrophic. Indigenous populations, lacking immunity to diseases such as smallpox, suffered from devastating epidemics that decimated entire communities. The loss of life had profound social and cultural repercussions, as the fabric of indigenous societies was irreparably damaged. Economically, the disruption of traditional trade networks and systems posed significant challenges for indigenous communities. The fur trade, for example, altered power dynamics among indigenous groups, shifting traditional alliances and creating new forms of competition. The forced labor systems imposed by colonizers further deepened economic disparities, subjecting indigenous populations to exploitation and enslavement. As we delve into these multifaceted impacts, it becomes evident that the legacies of European exploration and colonization are complex and enduring. Our exploration today will summarize the major themes covered throughout the week, emphasizing the intricacies and lasting effects of these historical encounters. By understanding the profound transformations brought about by colonization, we can better appreciate the complexities of our shared history and its influence on contemporary global issues. Economic and cultural impact on the Old World. As we delve into the profound effects of European colonization on the Old World, we encounter a complex interplay of economic, cultural, and intellectual transformations. The influx of wealth and resources from the New World catalyzed significant changes in Europe, reshaping societies and fueling a period of remarkable growth and innovation. Economic transformation. The arrival of vast quantities of precious metals, particularly silver and gold, from the New World had a transformative impact on European economies. Spain, Portugal, and other European powers extracted immense wealth from their American colonies, which fundamentally altered the economic landscape of Europe. This influx of precious metals led to an era of prosperity and expansion, fostering the development of a more robust and interconnected global economy. The new wealth spurred by colonization was instrumental in fueling the rise of capitalism. European nations increasingly engaged in global trade, establishing complex trade networks that connected Europe with Africa, Asia, and the Americas. This expansion of trade networks not only increased wealth, but also stimulated economic development and competition among European powers. The establishment of the mercantile system, characterized by a focus on accumulating wealth through trade and colonial exploitation, became a defining feature of the European economic landscape. Additionally, the wealth derived from colonization facilitated investments in various sectors, including infrastructure, arts, and science. The increased economic resources enabled European nations to fund grand projects, including the construction of impressive public buildings, the commissioning of artworks, and the expansion of scientific research. This period saw a flourishing of the arts, with notable figures such as Rembrandt, Vermeer, and Caravaggio creating masterpieces that reflected both the prosperity and the changing dynamics of European societies. Cultural impact. Beyond the economic changes, European colonization profoundly influenced European culture and intellectual life. The influx of new resources, ideas, and technologies from the New World broadened European horizons and contributed to a period of significant cultural and intellectual development. One of the most notable cultural impacts was the stimulation of curiosity and exploration. The European encounter with diverse cultures and new technologies from the Americas ignited a spirit of inquiry and discovery. This burgeoning curiosity laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution, a period marked by groundbreaking advancements in science and technology. Figures such as Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, and Isaac Newton made significant contributions to fields such as astronomy, physics, and mathematics, driven by a desire to understand the natural world in new ways. The period of exploration also contributed to the Enlightenment, an intellectual movement that emphasized reason, individualism, and skepticism of traditional authority. The Enlightenment thinkers, influenced by the influx of new knowledge and ideas, questioned established norms and sought to apply reason and empirical evidence to various aspects of human life. This intellectual movement played a crucial role in shaping modern democratic and philosophical thought, influencing political theories and social reforms that continue to resonate today. Furthermore, the cultural exchange between Europe and the New World led to the adoption of new customs, foods, and technologies. European societies experienced a diversification of their diets with the introduction of crops such as potatoes, tomatoes, and chocolate, which became integral to European cuisine. The exchange of artistic styles and cultural practices enriched European cultural life, fostering a greater appreciation for global diversity. In summary, the economic and cultural impacts of European colonization on the Old World were profound and far-reaching. The influx of wealth from the New World catalyzed economic growth and the rise of capitalism, while also enabling significant investments in art, infrastructure, and science. Culturally, the period of exploration and colonization stimulated intellectual advancements and broadened European perspectives, laying the foundation for the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. As we continue our exploration, it is crucial to recognize how these changes in the Old World were intricately connected with the broader global transformations brought about by European colonization. Understanding these impacts provides a comprehensive view of how this historical period reshaped not only Europe, but also set the stage for future global interactions and developments. Intellectual expansion in Europe. As we examine the impact of European colonization on the Old World, it becomes evident that this period was not just one of economic prosperity, but also of profound intellectual transformation. The encounter with new resources, cultures, and ideas from the New World played a pivotal role in shaping European thought and laying the groundwork for significant intellectual movements. Scientific revolution. One of the most remarkable intellectual developments triggered by European colonization was the scientific revolution. This period, spanning roughly from the late 16th century to the 18th century, was marked by a dramatic shift in how Europeans understood and investigated the natural world. The influx of new knowledge and resources from the Americas provided a fertile ground for scientific inquiry and innovation. The discovery of new plants, animals, and geographical information from the New World stimulated scientific curiosity and led to a reevaluation of established knowledge. Naturalists and explorers brought back detailed observations of previously unknown species and ecosystems, which challenged existing scientific theories and inspired further research. This influx of empirical data encouraged a more systematic and observational approach to science, laying the foundation for modern scientific methods. Prominent figures such as Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, and Isaac Newton made groundbreaking contributions during this period. Galileo's telescopic observations expanded our understanding of the cosmos, Kepler's laws of planetary motion revolutionized astronomy, and Newton's laws of motion and universal gravitation provided a unified framework for understanding physical phenomena. These advancements were driven by the spirit of inquiry and empirical evidence that characterized the scientific revolution. Enlightenment. The intellectual awakening of the scientific revolution seamlessly transitioned into the Enlightenment, a period of profound philosophical and cultural development in Europe. The Enlightenment, which emerged in the late 17th and 18th centuries, was characterized by an emphasis on reason, individualism, and skepticism of traditional authority. The new knowledge and ideas flowing from the exploration and colonization of the New World played a crucial role in shaping Enlightenment thought. Enlightenment thinkers were deeply influenced by the empirical evidence and scientific discoveries of the preceding period. They sought to apply reason and critical thinking to various aspects of human life, including politics, economics, and social organization. Philosophers such as Voltaire, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau challenged traditional institutions and advocated for individual rights, liberty, and democratic governance. Their ideas contributed to the development of modern political theories and social reforms. The Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and empirical evidence laid the groundwork for democratic institutions and human rights, which continue to influence contemporary political and social thought. Cultural exchange, and intellectual curiosity. The period of exploration and colonization also fostered a greater appreciation for global diversity and cultural exchange. The encounters between Europeans and indigenous peoples introduced Europeans to a wide range of new cultural practices, technologies, and artistic expressions. This exposure broadened European perspectives and contributed to a more cosmopolitan worldview. European intellectuals became increasingly interested in the study of non-European cultures and civilizations. The documentation of indigenous cultures, languages, and traditions provided valuable insights and challenged Eurocentric views. This growing interest in global cultures contributed to the development of anthropology and comparative studies, fields that seek to understand human societies in their diversity and complexity. Additionally, the exchange of artistic styles and techniques between Europe and the Americas enriched European art and culture. European artists were exposed to new forms of visual expression and materials, which influenced their work and led to the development of new artistic styles. Conclusion. In summary, the intellectual expansion in Europe during the era of exploration and colonization was marked by a significant shift in how knowledge was pursued and understood. The scientific revolution and the Enlightenment represented periods of profound intellectual growth, driven by the influx of new knowledge and ideas from the New World. These developments laid the foundation for modern science, philosophy, and cultural studies, shaping European thought and influencing global intellectual traditions. As we move forward, it is essential to recognize how these intellectual advancements were interconnected with the broader impacts of European colonization, both in Europe and across the globe. Understanding this intellectual transformation provides valuable insight into the enduring legacies of exploration and colonization and their influence on contemporary global thought and culture. Transformations in the New World. As we explore the impact of European colonization on the New World, it is essential to understand how these encounters reshaped indigenous societies, cultures, and landscapes. The arrival of Europeans introduced significant changes that were both revolutionary and disruptive, altering the course of history in the Americas. Agricultural Revolution. One of the most profound transformations in the New World was the revolution in agriculture brought about by the introduction of new crops. European colonizers introduced a variety of plants from the Old World, including wheat, sugarcane, and coffee, which had significant effects on indigenous agriculture and diets. Conversely, the exchange of crops from the New World to Europe also had far-reaching consequences. Among the most impactful crops introduced to Europe from the Americas were potatoes, maize, corn, and tomatoes. Potatoes, in particular, became a staple food in many European countries, providing a reliable and nutritious food source that contributed to population growth and agricultural stability. Similarly, maize became a crucial crop in Africa and Asia, influencing agricultural practices and diets across the globe. The introduction of these new crops transformed not only agricultural practices, but also economies and societies. The increased food supply supported population growth and urbanization in various regions, leading to significant demographic and economic changes. The global exchange of crops facilitated by European colonization reshaped agricultural systems and dietary patterns on a worldwide scale. Integration of European animals. The arrival of European animals in the New World brought about significant changes in indigenous societies. Horses, in particular, had a profound impact on the cultures and economies of many indigenous groups. Before European contact, horses were not present in the Americas. Their introduction revolutionized transportation, hunting, and warfare. For many indigenous peoples, horses became essential for hunting bison and other game, dramatically altering traditional hunting practices. The mobility provided by horses also enhanced trade networks and expanded territorial ranges, leading to changes in social and political dynamics among indigenous groups. For some societies, the acquisition of horses led to increased power and influence, while others faced challenges in adapting to the new technologies and competition introduced by their use. In addition to horses, Europeans introduced other animals such as cattle, pigs, and sheep. These animals became integrated into indigenous economies and diets, but their introduction also led to environmental changes and challenges. The grazing of European livestock contributed to land degradation and the alteration of ecosystems, impacting traditional ways of life. Environmental and societal changes. The arrival of Europeans and their animals had significant environmental impacts in the New World. The introduction of new agricultural practices and livestock led to changes in land use and ecosystems. European-style farming techniques, such as large-scale cultivation and monoculture, replaced traditional indigenous agricultural systems, leading to alterations in local environments and biodiversity. Additionally, the spread of European diseases had a devastating impact on indigenous populations. Diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza, to which indigenous peoples had no immunity, caused widespread epidemics and significant population declines. The loss of life had profound social and cultural repercussions as communities struggled to cope with the loss of traditional knowledge and social structures. Cultural displacement and adaptation. The arrival of Europeans also led to the displacement of indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands. European colonizers often claimed land for settlement and resource extraction, forcing many indigenous communities to move or adapt to new circumstances. This displacement resulted in the fracturing of communities and the erosion of traditional cultural practices. However, indigenous societies also demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. Many communities found ways to incorporate elements of European culture into their own traditions, creating hybrid cultural practices that reflected both indigenous and European influences. This process of cultural exchange and adaptation contributed to the development of new cultural identities and practices in the New World. Conclusion. In summary, the transformations in the New World brought about by European colonization were profound and multifaceted. The introduction of new crops, animals, and agricultural practices revolutionized indigenous societies and economies. At the same time, the environmental changes, diseases, and cultural displacement experienced by indigenous peoples had significant and often devastating impacts. Understanding these transformations provides valuable insight into how European colonization reshaped the Americas and influenced global history. As we continue our exploration, it is crucial to recognize the complex and enduring legacies of these changes and their ongoing impact on contemporary indigenous communities and global interactions. Social and cultural disruptions. The impact of European colonization on indigenous populations in the New World was profound and multifaceted, resulting in significant social and cultural disruptions. The arrival of Europeans brought about changes that fractured indigenous societies, eroded cultural identities, and led to widespread upheaval, displacement, and fragmentation. One of the most immediate and devastating effects of European colonization was the displacement of indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands. As European powers expanded their territories and established colonies, they often encroached upon and seized lands that had been inhabited and cared for by indigenous communities for centuries. This displacement disrupted traditional ways of life and forced many indigenous groups to migrate or adapt to new and often harsh environments. The loss of land had far-reaching consequences for indigenous societies. Traditional land-based practices, such as agriculture, hunting, and gathering, were disrupted, leading to food shortages and economic instability. The fragmentation of communities also resulted in the loss of social cohesion and traditional knowledge, as people were forced to leave behind their homes and cultural practices. Erosion of cultural identities. European colonization brought with it a host of new cultural norms, religions, and institutions that had a profound impact on indigenous cultures. European missionaries and colonial authorities often sought to impose their own cultural and religious practices on indigenous populations. This imposition led to the erosion of traditional cultural identities and the suppression of indigenous languages, religions, and customs. Missionaries, for example, actively worked to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity, often disregarding or actively suppressing indigenous spiritual practices. This forced cultural assimilation not only undermined indigenous religious traditions, but also contributed to the loss of cultural heritage and identity. Indigenous languages, many of which were integral to cultural expression and communal knowledge, faced decline as European languages became dominant. Impact of European diseases. The introduction of European diseases had a catastrophic impact on indigenous populations. Diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza spread rapidly among indigenous communities, causing widespread epidemics. Indigenous peoples had no immunity to these diseases, and the resulting mortality rates were devastating. The loss of life from these epidemics had profound social and cultural repercussions. Entire communities were decimated, leading to the breakdown of social structures and the loss of vital cultural knowledge and practices. The demographic collapse also exacerbated the effects of displacement and cultural erosion, as surviving communities struggled to cope with the combined impacts of disease, land loss, and cultural suppression. Cultural adaptation and resistance. Despite the overwhelming challenges posed by European colonization, indigenous peoples demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. Many communities engaged in various forms of resistance to colonial pressures, seeking to protect their lands, cultures, and ways of life. Indigenous resistance took many forms, including armed conflict, diplomatic negotiations, and the preservation of cultural practices. Some communities engaged in direct confrontations with colonial forces, while others sought to negotiate terms of coexistence or adapt colonial practices to fit their own cultural contexts. Resistance also manifested in the preservation of traditional knowledge and cultural practices, often through subtle means or in private settings. Cultural adaptation was another response to European colonization. Indigenous peoples often integrated new elements from European culture into their own traditions, creating hybrid practices that reflected a blend of indigenous and European influences. This cultural exchange led to the development of new artistic expressions, religious practices, and social structures that were uniquely adapted to the changing circumstances. Conclusion. In summary, the social and cultural disruptions caused by European colonization had profound and lasting effects on indigenous populations in the New World. The displacement from ancestral lands, erosion of cultural identities, and the impact of diseases were among the most significant challenges faced by indigenous communities. However, through resilience and adaptation, many indigenous peoples managed to navigate and survive the profound changes brought about by colonization. Understanding these disruptions provides valuable insight into the complexities of European colonization and its enduring legacies. It highlights the importance of acknowledging and respecting indigenous histories and cultures while recognizing the resilience and contributions of indigenous peoples in the face of historical adversity. Economic upheaval and exploitation. The economic impact of European colonization on indigenous populations in the New World was marked by significant upheaval and exploitation. The introduction of European trade networks and labor systems fundamentally altered indigenous economies and social structures, often to the detriment of the indigenous peoples. Disruption of traditional trade networks. Prior to European contact, indigenous societies in the Americas had developed complex and diverse trade networks. These networks facilitated the exchange of goods, resources, and cultural practices across vast distances. However, the arrival of Europeans disrupted these traditional systems in several ways. European colonizers established new trade routes and introduced new commodities, such as metals, textiles, and firearms, into indigenous economies. While some indigenous groups initially engaged with these new trade goods, the European demand for certain resources, such as furs and precious metals, led to significant changes in traditional trade dynamics. The fur trade, in particular, had a profound impact on indigenous societies. European demand for beaver pelts and other furs led to intense competition among indigenous groups and between indigenous peoples and European traders. This competition disrupted traditional trade alliances and social structures, leading to shifts in power dynamics and increased intergroup conflicts. Economic exploitation and labor systems. The economic exploitation of indigenous peoples was another significant aspect of European colonization. European colonizers imposed various labor systems that exploited indigenous labor for the benefit of colonial economies. One of the most notorious systems was the encomienda system, which granted Spanish colonizers the right to extract labor and tribute from indigenous communities. Under the encomienda system, indigenous peoples were forced to work in mines, plantations, and other colonial enterprises under harsh conditions. This system often resulted in severe mistreatment, exploitation, and high mortality rates among indigenous workers. The forced labor contributed to the accumulation of wealth for European colonizers while devastating indigenous communities. Another form of economic exploitation was the repartimiento system, which replaced the encomienda system but continued to enforce labor obligations on indigenous peoples. Although it was intended to provide better working conditions, it still subjected indigenous peoples to forced labor and exploitation, particularly in mining and agricultural enterprises. Shifts in power dynamics. The introduction of European trade goods and labor systems led to shifts in power dynamics among indigenous groups. The acquisition of European firearms, for example, altered traditional hunting and warfare practices, giving certain groups an advantage over others. This shift in power dynamics often led to increased conflicts and competition among indigenous groups. Additionally, the influx of European goods and the introduction of new economic systems contributed to changes in social hierarchies and political structures within indigenous societies. Some groups gained power and influence through their involvement in trade with Europeans, while others experienced marginalization and displacement. Economic dependency and inequality. The economic changes brought about by European colonization led to increased dependency of indigenous peoples on European trade goods and markets. As traditional economies were disrupted, many indigenous communities became reliant on European goods and systems for their survival. This dependency created economic inequalities and left indigenous communities vulnerable to exploitation. The introduction of European commodities and trade practices also led to the rise of economic inequalities within indigenous societies. Wealth and resources became concentrated in the hands of those who had access to European trade networks, while others faced economic hardship and marginalization. This disparity contributed to social tensions and conflicts within indigenous communities. Conclusion. In summary, the economic upheaval and exploitation resulting from European colonization had profound and lasting effects on indigenous populations in the New World. The disruption of traditional trade networks, the imposition of exploitative labor systems, and shifts in power dynamics fundamentally altered indigenous economies and social structures. Understanding these economic impacts highlights the complexities of European colonization and its enduring legacies. It underscores the need to recognize the historical injustices faced by indigenous peoples and to address the ongoing consequences of economic exploitation and dependency. By acknowledging these impacts, we can better understand the historical context of indigenous experiences and work towards addressing historical inequalities. Cultural syncretism and hybrid identities. The process of European colonization in the New World did not only result in the disruption and loss of indigenous cultures, it also led to the creation of new, hybrid identities and cultural practices through the process of cultural syncretism. This blending of European and indigenous cultures gave rise to unique cultural forms and practices that reflected the complexities of colonial encounters. Blending of traditions and practices. As Europeans and indigenous peoples interacted, They brought with them their own cultural practices, beliefs, and traditions. This encounter led to a blending of these diverse cultural elements, resulting in the creation of new, hybrid practices. In many cases, indigenous peoples adapted European customs and materials to fit their own cultural contexts, leading to the development of unique forms of art, religion, and social organization. For example, in the realm of religion, indigenous peoples often incorporated elements of Christianity into their traditional spiritual practices. This syncretism led to the development of unique religious expressions that combined Christian iconography and rituals with indigenous beliefs and practices. In Latin America, this phenomenon is evident in practices such as the Day of the Dead, where indigenous traditions are blended with Catholic elements to create a distinctive cultural celebration. Hybrid artistic expressions. The blending of European and indigenous cultures also had a significant impact on the arts. European artists and artisans introduced new techniques and materials, which were incorporated into indigenous artistic traditions. This cross-cultural exchange resulted in hybrid artistic expressions that combined European and indigenous styles, motifs, and techniques. In architecture, for example, colonial-era churches and buildings in the Americas often incorporated indigenous design elements alongside European architectural styles. This fusion of styles created unique structures that reflected both the influence of European colonizers and the adaptation of indigenous aesthetics. In the visual arts, indigenous artists began to experiment with European artistic techniques, such as oil painting and perspective, while retaining traditional themes and subjects. This blending of artistic methods resulted in artworks that reflected the diverse cultural influences present in colonial societies. New social and cultural institutions. The process of cultural syncretism also led to the creation of new social and cultural institutions that reflected the blended identities of colonial societies. For instance, new forms of music and dance emerged that combined European and indigenous elements. The development of hybrid musical styles, such as Afro-Cuban music and Andean folk music, illustrates the ways in which colonial encounters gave rise to new cultural expressions. In addition to music and dance, new culinary traditions also emerged from the blending of European and indigenous ingredients and cooking techniques. The incorporation of indigenous crops, such as maize and potatoes, into European culinary practices led to the creation of new dishes and food cultures that are now considered integral to the culinary heritage of the Americas. Resistance and cultural preservation. Despite the pressures of colonization, many indigenous communities actively sought to preserve their cultural heritage and resist cultural assimilation. Indigenous peoples employed various strategies to maintain their traditional practices and identities while navigating the challenges of colonial rule. Resistance took many forms, including the continuation of traditional ceremonies and rituals, the preservation of indigenous languages, and the adaptation of cultural practices in ways that allowed them to endure under colonial conditions. By maintaining and adapting their cultural practices, indigenous communities were able to assert their identities and resist the pressures of cultural assimilation. Conclusion. In summary, the cultural syncretism resulting from European colonization led to the emergence of hybrid identities and practices that reflected the complexities of colonial encounters. The blending of European and indigenous cultures gave rise to new artistic expressions, social institutions, and cultural practices that continue to shape the cultural landscape of the Americas. Understanding these hybrid identities highlights the resilience and adaptability of indigenous peoples in the face of colonization. It also underscores the importance of recognizing and valuing the diverse cultural contributions that emerged from this period of history. By acknowledging the process of cultural syncretism, we gain a deeper appreciation for the rich and multifaceted cultural heritage that has shaped the New World. Legacies of colonization in contemporary societies. The legacies of European colonization are deeply embedded in contemporary societies, both in the Americas and Europe. These legacies are evident in various aspects of social, cultural, and political life, shaping modern identities, economic structures, and geopolitical dynamics. Understanding these enduring legacies is crucial for comprehending the ongoing impact of colonization and addressing contemporary issues related to historical injustices. Social and political legacies. One of the most significant legacies of European colonization is the influence on social and political structures in former colonies. The colonial period introduced new forms of governance, legal systems, and administrative practices that continue to shape the political landscapes of many countries today. In many former colonies, European colonial powers imposed centralized forms of governance that disrupted traditional indigenous political systems. The legacy of these imposed structures can still be seen in contemporary political institutions and practices. For instance, the administrative boundaries and political divisions established during the colonial period often persist in modern nation-states, influencing political and social dynamics. Additionally, the colonial legacy has had a lasting impact on social hierarchies and inequalities. The racial and ethnic hierarchies established during colonization often continue to affect social relations and contribute to systemic inequalities in contemporary societies. Issues such as racial discrimination, land rights, and social marginalization are directly linked to historical patterns of colonization and exploitation. Cultural and identity legacies. The cultural legacies of European colonization are also profound and multifaceted. The blending of European and indigenous cultures, as discussed earlier, gave rise to hybrid identities and cultural practices that continue to influence contemporary societies. These hybrid cultural forms are an important part of the cultural heritage of many countries in the Americas. At the same time, the suppression of indigenous languages, traditions, and religions during the colonial period has had lasting effects on cultural identity. Many indigenous communities continue to work towards the revitalization and preservation of their languages and cultural practices, striving to reclaim and assert their cultural heritage in the face of historical and ongoing challenges. The impact of European cultural norms and values is also evident in contemporary societies. European languages, religious practices, and cultural traditions have become deeply ingrained in the cultural fabric of many countries. This cultural legacy can be seen in aspects such as education, legal systems, and social customs, reflecting the enduring influence of European colonization. Economic and environmental legacies. The economic legacies of colonization are equally significant. The exploitation of natural resources and the introduction of new economic systems during the colonial period laid the foundation for contemporary economic structures and practices. The legacy of resource extraction and economic exploitation continues to impact the economies of many former colonies, contributing to issues such as economic dependency and environmental degradation. The environmental impact of colonization is also evident in the ongoing challenges related to land use and environmental conservation. The introduction of European agricultural practices and livestock, as well as the exploitation of natural resources, has had lasting effects on ecosystems and biodiversity. Contemporary efforts to address environmental issues and promote sustainable practices are often informed by the need to mitigate the historical impacts of colonization. Ongoing reconciliation and reparations. In recent years, there has been a growing recognition of the need to address the historical injustices and legacies of colonization. Efforts towards reconciliation and reparations are becoming more prominent as societies confront the enduring impacts of colonization. Reparations and reconciliation initiatives may include formal apologies, compensation for historical wrongs, and support for the revitalization of indigenous cultures and languages. Additionally, there is a growing emphasis on acknowledging and addressing the systemic inequalities and social injustices that have persisted as a result of colonization. Conclusion. In summary, The legacies of European colonization are deeply embedded in contemporary societies, influencing social, cultural, and economic dynamics. The impact of colonization continues to shape political structures, cultural identities, and environmental practices. Understanding these legacies is crucial for addressing historical injustices and working towards a more equitable and inclusive future. By recognizing the enduring impact of colonization, we can better appreciate the complexities of contemporary issues and support efforts to address historical grievances. Acknowledging these legacies allows us to engage with the past in a meaningful way and work towards creating a more just and equitable society. Revisiting historical narratives and perspectives. The exploration of European colonization and its impact on both the Old World and the New World necessitates a critical reassessment of historical narratives and perspectives. Traditional histories often reflect the viewpoints of colonial powers and may overlook or misrepresent the experiences and contributions of indigenous peoples. Revisiting and reevaluating these narratives is essential for a more comprehensive and accurate understanding of history. Challenging Eurocentric perspectives. Many historical accounts of European colonization have been dominated by Eurocentric perspectives, which emphasize the achievements and motivations of European powers while marginalizing or ignoring the experiences of indigenous peoples. Eurocentric narratives often portray colonization as a civilizing mission or a quest for progress, overlooking the exploitation, violence, and disruption faced by indigenous communities. Challenging these Eurocentric perspectives involves highlighting the agency and contributions of indigenous peoples in shaping their own histories. Indigenous voices and perspectives provide crucial insights into the impacts of colonization and the ways in which indigenous communities resisted, adapted, and thrived despite the challenges imposed by European colonizers. Incorporating indigenous histories and voices. Revisiting historical narratives requires incorporating indigenous histories and voices into the broader historical discourse. Indigenous communities possess rich oral traditions, historical records, and cultural knowledge that offer valuable perspectives on the impact of colonization. By integrating these voices, we gain a more nuanced understanding of the complexities of colonial encounters and their consequences. Efforts to include indigenous perspectives can be seen in various fields, including academic research, museum exhibitions, and educational curricula. These initiatives aim to present a more balanced and inclusive account of history, acknowledging the diverse experiences and contributions of indigenous peoples. Reassessing historical events and impacts. Reevaluating historical events and their impacts involves questioning traditional interpretations and exploring alternative perspectives. For example, the portrayal of explorers and colonizers as heroic figures may obscure the realities of violence, exploitation, and cultural suppression experienced by indigenous peoples. Reassessing these events helps to uncover the full range of experiences and consequences associated with colonization. Additionally, understanding the long-term impacts of colonization on contemporary societies requires examining how historical events have shaped modern issues. For instance, the legacy of colonial land policies and economic systems continues to influence debates over land rights, resource management, and social inequalities. A critical reassessment of historical events helps to connect past injustices with present-day challenges. Promoting inclusive education and public discourse. Promoting inclusive education and public discourse is essential for fostering a more accurate and comprehensive understanding of history. Educational institutions, media, and public organizations play a crucial role in shaping historical narratives and providing opportunities for diverse perspectives to be heard. Curricula that include indigenous histories, cultures, and contributions can help to challenge stereotypes and promote a more nuanced understanding of historical events. Public discourse, including literature, media, and cultural productions, also plays a role in reshaping historical narratives and addressing historical injustices. Encouraging dialogue and reflection. Encouraging dialogue and reflection about historical narratives and their implications is vital for fostering understanding and reconciliation. Open discussions about the impacts of colonization, the legacies of historical injustices, and the contributions of diverse communities can help to build a more inclusive and equitable society. Reflecting on history also involves acknowledging and addressing the ways in which historical narratives continue to influence contemporary issues. By engaging with the past in a thoughtful and critical manner, we can work towards creating a more informed and just society. Conclusion. In summary, revisiting historical narratives and perspectives is essential for gaining a more accurate and inclusive understanding of European colonization and its impacts. Challenging Eurocentric perspectives, incorporating indigenous voices, reassessing historical events, and promoting inclusive education and public discourse all contribute to a more comprehensive view of history. By critically examining historical narratives and their legacies, we can better appreciate the complexities of the past and address ongoing issues related to historical injustices. Engaging with history in a reflective and inclusive manner allows us to build a more equitable and informed society, acknowledging the diverse experiences and contributions that have shaped our world. Conclusion. Weaving the tapestry of history. As we conclude our exploration into the profound impacts of European colonization, it is essential to reflect on the intricate tapestry of history that has emerged from this complex and transformative period. The legacy of colonization has reshaped societies on both sides of the Atlantic, leaving enduring marks on social structures, cultural identities, and global interactions. The dual impact of colonization. European colonization was a watershed moment that transformed not only the lands and peoples of the New World, but also had profound effects on the Old World. In Europe, the influx of wealth from colonies spurred economic growth, funded artistic endeavors, and fueled the expansion of mercantile and scientific pursuits. This period of exploration and exploitation led to significant cultural and intellectual developments, including the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, which in turn shaped modern European societies. In the New World, European colonization resulted in dramatic changes to indigenous societies and environments. The introduction of new crops and animals revolutionized agriculture and daily life, while the displacement of indigenous peoples, the spread of diseases, and the imposition of European cultural norms caused widespread disruption and suffering. Despite these challenges, the process of cultural syncretism led to the emergence of new hybrid identities and practices, reflecting the resilience and adaptability of indigenous peoples. Complexities and enduring legacies. The impact of colonization is marked by a multitude of complexities and enduring legacies. The interactions between European and indigenous cultures resulted in both positive and negative outcomes. While the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies facilitated cultural and economic growth, the legacy of colonization also includes ongoing social inequalities, cultural suppression, and environmental degradation. The legacies of colonization continue to shape contemporary debates and challenges, including issues related to land rights, cultural preservation, and social justice. Understanding these legacies is crucial for addressing historical grievances and working towards a more equitable and inclusive future. The importance of re-examining historical narratives. Revisiting and re-examining historical narratives is essential for gaining a comprehensive understanding of the impacts of colonization. Traditional Eurocentric perspectives often overlook or misrepresent the experiences of indigenous peoples. By incorporating diverse voices and perspectives, we can achieve a more nuanced and accurate view of history. Efforts to include indigenous histories, challenge traditional interpretations, and promote inclusive education contribute to a more balanced historical discourse. This process of reflection and dialogue helps to build a deeper appreciation of the complexities of the past and informs contemporary efforts to address historical injustices. a call for empathy and understanding. As we conclude this exploration, it is important to approach the history of colonization with empathy and understanding. The stories of exploration and colonization are not merely historical events, but are woven into the fabric of our shared human experience. By acknowledging the enduring impacts of colonization and recognizing the resilience of affected communities, we can work towards a future that respects and honors diverse histories and experiences. The study of European colonization serves as a reminder of the interconnectedness of our global history and the importance of engaging with the past in a thoughtful and reflective manner. It urges us to navigate the complexities of our shared heritage with a commitment to justice, equity, and understanding. As we move forward, let us carry with us the lessons learned from this week-long journey. The exploration of European colonization has revealed a tapestry of interconnections that span continents and centuries. By recognizing the profound impacts of colonization, we can better understand the present and work towards shaping a future that acknowledges and respects the diverse experiences and contributions of all peoples. In conclusion, history is not a linear progression, but a rich and intricate tapestry woven from diverse experiences, motivations, and legacies. The stories of exploration and colonization remind us of the complexities of human interactions and the importance of approaching our shared history with empathy, understanding, and a commitment to shaping a more just and equitable world.